Hello, everybody, and welcome to Getting APIs to Work. Today, we talk about API strategy for decision makers, a new book that was published by O'Reilly. And I have the authors here. I'm very happy that you joined Derric Gilling, CEO of Moisif, and Mike Amundsen, my frequent guest, Mike Amundsen. Thanks so much for joining. Derric, maybe you can give us a little intro about yourself.
Sure, definitely. CEO of Mosif, which is a leading API analytics and monetization platform. We love helping and working with different startups and enterprises and figuring out the API first strategy. How do you scale your APIs and get customer adoption, which is always a tricky thing with these API first products.
And Mike, you co-authored the book with Derric, and I'm wondering, like, what was the thing that you found interesting jumping into this project?
Yeah, so I definitely, as a co-author, really too. I learned so much from Derric. I got to know Mosif a little bit about a year or so ago. You and I have talked about this before. Always looking for new tooling, new approach. I was focusing on monetization and managing of the product lifecycle, and bumped into Derric, and we got to talking and had this opportunity. I just noticed this is a topic that I think is very timely and very useful. So we got together and did a little report here with O'Reilly, and I really enjoyed the experience, and I'm really excited for people to learn about this notion of selling API products and what that life cycle really looks like in a really tangible way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll of course link to the report from the video. And we won't talk about all of the contents. Check it out if you're interested in it. But the one thing that I thought would be interesting to talk about would be really that thing that you just mentioned, Mike, was this idea that how do you make API products successful? What does it take to really sell to developers? What is different when you compare it maybe to other ways, how you can do selling? So let's just jump into this. So Derric, when you are talking to people who try to launch API products or who have API products and want to make them more successful, what is your guidance? What are you saying to them really can make a difference?
Sure. So one of the hardest things to figure out is selling and making sure that your go-to-market fits your audience. In this case, many times an API first company is trying to get developers, a technical audience, VP of engineering on board. With that said, the way that software is bought these days is completely different than it was 5 or 10 years ago. Individual developers have a lot more authority and autonomy to pick and choose the tools they want to use, which also makes buying itself much more decentralized than before. The other big piece that we've seen is that if you think about an API product in general, many times it's something that's unlocking or enabling a new function within the product itself. That means most likely you're going to have to incorporate this API in production. It might touch customer data. That means there's legal and security implications. There's procurement that you need to go through. So there's a lot of these different blockers and changes that are happening as someone buys software. And so when we think about selling an API product, what we usually recommend is land the developer first. Just get an individual developer to pay a token amount. Maybe it's $50 a month, $100 a month, or whatever it is, and they're just using their manager's card. So that way they're sidestepping all the legal and security review that they would need to do. They don't have to deal as much with trying to go through a 6-month PLC process. They're just testing it out through like a small trial. Maybe it's free, maybe it's a small plan, just to get them started and see that aha moment and value in the API.
Yeah.
It also means then in the end, right, that you need to observe them, right, how they're doing along their trajectory, right? I think that's where I really like this story, because all these things come so nicely together.
Exactly. And there's this, I guess, misnomer that you don't have a sales team. If you're going to sell an API, there's still going to be some type of sales team, because eventually you're going to want to increase that ACV. You're going to have to be chatting with the VP level, whoever your decision maker is. But the sales team is engaging at a much later stage in the buying process. Usually when sales is getting engaged, the integration is already done. You already have couple developers that's been testing the API. Maybe it's in a sandbox environment. Maybe it's already in production, and you know, at that point, there's looking at how do you solidify that contract and relationship. And so when sales is thinking about who to prioritize, they're looking at usage metrics, and they're looking at, you know, is this a business that's increasing their usage of the API, or is it a business that is, you know, has maybe complex needs, and they see that, you know, those developers are already excited about the product, and that means by the time you're chatting with that decision maker, you know, that it's already been in production, or it's already been, you know, tested out, and it's just more a matter of solidifying the relationship itself.
You know, I was going to say, I think one of the things that I learned in talking with Derric, and as we worked on this book project together, is one of the keys that are being addressed is this sort of squashing of the timeline. You know, a developer needs to get something up and running, even if it's just a test piece, just a, you know, a proof of concept piece, and sort of getting the sales loop that we were talking about here, setting that aside for a minute just to get an API up and running is a super powerful way to get developers on board, and developers become one of your advocates for the product. And I think that's a real plus for the experience. So when it does, you know, come time to go through all of the paperwork and work out all the details for, you know, for a user agreement, you've already got people on board. And as Derric was saying, you already have proof that this has an effect, which I think was the other one that I really learned from this experience. I don't know if you would say this, Derric, or not, but what I kind of learned from talking with you about this and looking at how you look at this, it's almost like an API for APIs or an API for products. It's like when your API is an enhancement, when your API increases value or reduces risk or reduces the time to market, then there's evidence that's available that sort of like makes it easier for people to kind of like sell in. So I don't know, does that make sense? That sort of APIs for APIs are sort of an additional feature, like your API is actually an enabler for everybody else.
It is. And an important piece here is, you know, I'm building an API first businesses. I'm going to be using a lot of other APIs to make that happen, whether it's Twilio for sending out text messages, or, you know, I'm going to have to handle payments somehow, you know, for folks who are signing up for this platform. With that said, though, you know, it takes a long time to test, integrate, and make sure that API works and fulfills my needs as a developer. And so I don't have time, you know, to be dealing with procurement and security, even though those are important things. But, you know, if you're just doing it in that test or sandbox environment, I want to get up and running at ASAP. See that hello world. And so we have a metric, what we call is time to hello world, which is that initial time from sign up to first API call. How long does that take? And that's a North Star metric that encompasses everything from documentation to onboarding to the API design to even your marketing material. But then there's another metric we talk about, which is time to value, or you can call it a time to revenue. Because even though you made that first API call, that might be done just with a tool, Postman or Curl or something like that. It doesn't necessarily mean the developer saw that aha moment yet. And so measuring that and trying to shorten that loop as much as possible is really helpful to get folks up and running, and then eventually to the enterprise agreement, because these are usually precursors to that step.
I find that really fascinating. You know, like I work at, let's say, a traditional software company, right? So we have a rather traditional sales process, and that's, I think, for what we're selling, that makes sense. But like listening to what you're saying, right, I find it so interesting to think about like all the things that are different when you think about it the way that you're describing, right? It's like, okay, you don't go through this long phase of just talking to potential customers and all these kind of things, right? It's a very, very different dynamic where you want to make sure that people just try it out and get first successes, and you also want to make sure this is all self-service. And then at some point, right, there may be a point where you're saying, okay, now you have tried it, now it seems to work for you, now maybe we should have a conversation around how you scale it up or these kind of things. So I'm wondering, like, what's the process when you look through how you've written the book? did you have in mind this this conversion process, let's say, from somebody with a more, let's say, traditional sales mindset to this different mindset? Is that something that you did, or what was your approach of telling the story throughout the book?
Yeah, so you actually have to pull in some of your experience from top-down enterprise sales, but then you also pull in some of the things that work for consumer-facing products. Trying to build out top of funnel and having a very rigorous self process, self guidance, and that type of stuff. But when we think about sales itself, again, there's no. It's not like you don't do sales. You still need to do it. But one of the great things about APIs is the transactional nature. So you can have a developer that starts using it, and if they're only in that sandbox stage, they don't need to have a $10,000 a month contract. They just need whatever they need to use. And then as soon as that there's more value being created, maybe it's transaction volume, maybe it's dollars and cents, whatever that value metric is, it's going to increase over time, especially as the company itself, increases the use of that product. And so that's something that a sales team needs to consider as part of their sales process is how do you track things like the usage of the API, which accounts is increasing or decreasing, is there a churn risk here? And those are all things that can be measured, whether it's a tool like MOSA or could be some type of data warehouse that you have internally. But it is important to have that data-driven culture even within the sales team.
Yeah, I think that's another thing that Derric and I talked about, and that's definitely in the book as well, is this notion of you need to create your own sort of dashboard, your own life cycle. Derric talks about top of funnel, but there's a whole process for how you can sort of pull developers in. Even getting developer interest. A lot of that has to do with helping developers solve the problems they have or offering up articles. One of the things that I learned from Derric was this idea of writing a lot of content, a lot of material that solves developers' problems. And then they say, you know what, I could really use an API for that. And they're like, wow, look at that. Here's an API for that. So it's a kind of a shift left in a different sort of way to me. It's like we'll get this POV up, we'll get this up and running, and then you're kind of bought in. You already have evidence. You're already getting some value, and from the product management standpoint, you already have a view into your developer community and how they're using it and what they're doing with it. And I think that's one of the other things that's really powerful. Derric talked about time to first hello and time to revenue or time to value. Having these ideas about what it takes for somebody to get to a real value proposition is a real important part of the cycle, I think.
So one thing I'm wondering about, I mean, my assumption is right that Mosif is a good platform that can help you to build out these kind of insights that you need to have to follow that model. But just having that platform, I'm guessing, isn't the whole story, right? You also need to come up with those metrics that actually are meaningful for the kinds of things that you are selling. And I'm just curious, is there anything in the platform, is there anything in the book where you help people to more easily figure out what are actually the metrics, like what Mike said, right? What should we put in our dashboard so that our dashboard gives us the insights into the customers where we know that, these people are doing interesting things, maybe we should get in touch, or these kind of things. I'm just fishing here basically for, how much support do I get to figure out these metrics, because this is always the tricky stuff, right? It's like, how do I define those things where we all agree that they're important, but really defining them sometimes can be tricky.
I would say both. In the book itself, we do talk about different metrics that an API team should be tracking, whether from the sales side or marketing side. Same thing in the platform. We do provide a lot of different pre-built dashboards. That way you don't have to start from scratch. If you're part of the customer success team, these are the different reports I can be looking at to track quotas and usage and that type of stuff. The last piece is how do you actually leverage this data? Just having a bunch of reports or dashboards, that's one thing, but it's actually how do you operationalize that so that maybe your onboarding flow, you can actually trigger different events like a email or a guide or something like that to actually push that developer and nudge them along that journey. On the flip side of things, how do you think about things like expanding the revenue, for each of your customers? And that's where, integrating with a tool like Stripe, which is something that most of have, which allows you to do things like usage-based billing, which is a new trend that we're seeing, especially with these API-first products, just because it's so easy for you to, create a value metric, whether it's number of text messages you're sending, maybe it's the number of minutes you're processing, or something along those lines. But having the right metering, usage, and billing, and that all comes together so you can see how usage correlates to revenue and then keep driving that revenue up.
Yeah, I think one of the other things we've talked about, this idea of time to first hello, and we briefly touched on another really important metric is onboarding. How long it takes to actually get to that stage where you get somebody on board and they've got an account and they're working it. But there's another one that I find really, really powerful, and in the book we call it API depth, or it's sort of the idea of once you get past that time to first hello, are they using the new features? Are they actually digging into the API beyond the first initial sort of like experience?
So it's kind of
have they discovered
coverage
something?
of the functionalities? Like, did you just do hello world, or did you actually play around a little further? Yeah.
Right, and it really helps you figure out, are you really serving your customers? Are your customers discovering sort of the valuable bits? How can you introduce them in another way? And I think that's another thing, Derric, wouldn't you say that has a lot to do with sort of those triggering experiences as well, understanding the users that you have and helping sort of guide them to new features and functionality in the API.
Totally agree. And I'd put these metrics on like a quadrant, a four quadrant box here, where, on one axis, you're trying to increase the usage of the API in transaction volume. But on the other axis, you're also trying to increase the depth and make sure they're able to use these different features, especially when we think about an API platform. Many times, these APIs are different building blocks. They're like Legos. And so you don't want just a customer using one single Lego at a time. You want them to see more and more value, which usually means they're using more and more functionality of the platform.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Actually, this idea of better understanding the coverage or depth, how you call it, right? I think that is something that I really find that's interesting for every API, not even just for kind of APIs you try to really productize, but like for any API that is super interesting information for the developers, right? Understanding, it's like there are certain things that pretty much nobody uses. There are other things that everybody uses. Yep. That's really valuable feedback, right? As you say, for improving the API over time. So I think by now we have made, I would hope, people curious and interested enough in understanding more about this idea of how to manage your APIs, how to have a strategy around your APIs that really helps you to productize them in an effective way and in a way that's different from any other products. I'd like to thank you for being here. It was a really interesting conversation. I'll link to the report from this video, and for anybody who wants to check it out, go there. It's free, right? I hope I'm not just making this up, but it is free, right?
Right, it's free. Yep.
Okay. That's an important detail. I don't want to be on the hook for paying for everybody. Okay, so thanks so much for joining. Thanks for being here. Thanks everybody for watching.
Yep.
And with that, everybody, see you next time. I hope this report and book will be a great success. And until then, keep getting APIs to work. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye, and thank you very much, Eric.